Yo, what's going on? Mike from Mike Talk Sports. UFC 292 on August 19th in Boston is about to be a banger, and the UFC just added another great fight to this card. This time it's Ian Machado Garry versus Geoff Neal. Let me give you guys an analytical and technical breakdown in terms of the tendencies of each fighter in order to determine, can Ian Garry take this huge step up into the welterweight division and pass this test. So this is going to be the first top 10 opponent in the UFC for Ian Garry. Again, a huge test for him. He's 12-0 at the moment. He's currently 5-0 in the UFC. So Garry really wants a fast track to the title. He absolutely thinks he's ready. And in his fights thus far, it's absolutely looked like he's a top 5 striker in the welterweight division. He's, of course, coming off an extremely impressive finish in his first 3 fights in the UFC. The finish ability from Ian Garry was a bit of a question mark, but he answered those questions in spectacular fashion as he's the first man to ever knock out D-Rod with that beautiful 1-2 head kick that he displayed in the first round. And then, of course, he has that third round Kenan Song TKO. Looked absolutely phenomenal in that fight as well. And then Geoff Neal, man, he has a really cool story. Of course, he's a UFC Dana White Contender Series winner. He was 15-5 at the moment. He's currently 7-3 in the UFC. He's been an extremely active fighter in the promotion ever since coming in 2018. He's coming off of a third-round submission loss against Shavkat Rakhmonov. A little bit of context, though, for that fight. He had a really tough training camp, a really tough weight cut. He was allegedly injured going into the fight, so he didn't even make the welterweight mark. He actually weighed in at 175, and he actually looked really good at times on the feet, giving Shavkat Rakhmonov by far the biggest test of his career. This fight, more or less in a nutshell, is basically Shavkat's version of the Khamzat Chimaev versus Gilbert Burns fight. And then before that, Geoff Neal had arguably his most impressive fight to date against Vicente Luque and really broke him over 3 rounds. Did absolutely incredible, completely outstriking and outdamaging Luque in the first 2 rounds. And then he actually put him away in the 3rd round, had him badly hurt, had him up against the cage, then blasted these crazy southpaw left-hand uppercuts to eventually finish the damn near unfinishable Vicente Luque. When breaking down the film for this fight, the first thing that screams out to you when looking at Geoff Neal's record and then watching him in his fights, he outright really struggles with lengthy strikers. In fact, in my opinion, he really has not beaten a lengthy welterweight striker in his entire career. He's faced Shavkat Rakhmonov, he's faced Neil Magny, he's faced Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, and he even faced Kevin Holland on the regional scene. If you guys haven't seen that fight yet, it's an absolute banger of a regional scene fight. I would love to see that fight ran back, but you get my point, guys. He's more or less 0 for 4 against lengthy strikers. It's not that his defense is that bad and he just gets completely picked apart, but Geoff Neal does not have the proper tools to fight on the outside. One of the other first things you'll notice about a Geoff Neal fight, he barely uses his jab. I can count on one hand the amount of jabs Geoff Neal will throw out in a 15-minute fight. It really is that little. Also, I can probably also count on one hand during a 15-minute Geoff Neal fight the amount of leg kicks he throws. So he really does not use the weapons that are used by most fighters in terms of managing length and fighting on the outside. Now, as I already alluded to previously, he's a 5'11 southpaw, and again, he really is just not that good from distance. What he'll do when he's on the outside from a distance is he'll really throw a straight left hand with no setup. His left hand, you could tell, is his dominant hand. In fact, he basically sets up everything to try to land that left hand. His right hand really is not his power hand. Not only does he not use it for a jab, but he really doesn't even use it for hooks either. He will throw out a right hand lead hand jab sometimes, but it really is followed with that left hand jab. It's just to set up a strike. The purpose of that right lead hand really is not to be damaging or to even really land flush at all. Now, Geoff Neal does have some pretty underrated body kicks. He'll sneak in that body kick over an opponent that really has a high guard, which is a good positive out of Geoff Neal from a distance. He also will throw out that roundhouse. The thing is, his roundhouse is very susceptible to being countered, considering he really does not set up that roundhouse kick to the head all that well. Another thing that's very apparent when watching him against lengthy fighters is that he's very susceptible to head kicks. You saw in the Shavkat-Rakhmonov fight, Shavkat was able to repeatedly land that roundhouse kick, and this really is because of Geoff Neal trying to get on the inside, and the way he tries to get on the inside sometimes is to rush into a clinch situation, or it is to kind of bob his head back and forth to make his opponent miss so he can reach that inside distance. The thing is, a good outside striker is going to use his movement in order to catch him when he's trying to move on the inside. Now, one thing about Geoff Neal, he's very hard to put out, and his head movement and his guard is pretty good. Now, you can definitely land around his guard. Now, within the inside part of his guard, it's definitely harder to land, but again, those head kicks and those hooks to the head could definitely land through Geoff Neal's guard. Now, one thing I absolutely love out of Geoff Neal, and it really is one of the central reasons why it's so hard to knock him out or even put him out, is because he does a phenomenal job at tucking his chin. His chin is always tucked. In fact, his guard is basically always wrapped around his chin. So he really knows if he gets touched on a chin, that's not a good thing. And he does a phenomenal job at avoiding that in a fight. All in all, for Geoff Neal, really the purpose of his fights and the intent in which he fights with is really to land that power left hand, because that left hand does have a whole lot of power in it. Now, let's look at Ian Garry a little bit. Now, I do have a lot of Ian Garry content on my channel, and I've broken him down in the past, but real quick, he's a very lengthy fighter, and he does love using that length to his advantage. He's a guy who's going to scale the octagon really nicely. His lateral movement and his forward pressure is really nice, but he has no problem with fighting off of the back foot. He's somewhat of a sniper off of the back foot. He really, when he's backing up, he uses his slips and head movements really nicely to land that and set up that left hand lead hand counters and hooks from that left lead hand. He loves getting forward pressure from those counters when his opponents start to back up on him. He will manage his distance really well with those really nice leg kicks, teeps to the body, kicks to the body. And Ian Garry, contrary to Geoff Neal, has a very nice jab, and he will throw out that jab a lot, and he will throw that jab with some intent to land and hurt his opponent. And from there, he is somewhat similar to Geoff Neal in the sense that he loves setting up that rear hand, power hand straight. And that straight right hand from Ian Garry has definitely gotten him a good amount of rocks and a good amount of KOs on the regional scene. And Ian Garry has even displayed to have a really nice chin. I think of that Gabe Green fight. He ate a lot of good, clean shots from Gabe Green, and he was ordered to survive. Not only that, but more importantly, recover, brush off the cobwebs, and still fight really well. And whenever you think about that with Ian Garry, you of course think of that Kenan Son fight where he got absolutely rocked, stunned big time, and went on to have an incredible performance. I think Geoff Neal is definitely going to try to get on the inside, clinch up with Ian Garry, and even attempt some takedowns. And though I think Geoff Neal has a lot of power and a lot of strength in the clinch, and I think he can get the better of Ian Garry the majority of the time in the clinch, Ian Garry does have some really nice clinch work, some nice knees to the body in the clinch, so he's not going to get dominated in the clinch, but in my opinion, he definitely wants to avoid the clinch. And to me, Geoff Neal is a good wrestler, but I don't think his wrestling entries and his takedown entries are quite good enough to repeatedly get Ian Garry on the ground. And once the fight hits the ground, I don't really see Geoff Neal's top control being quite good enough and quite up to par for Ian Garry to just be trapped on the ground for the entire fight. So in my opinion, if Geoff Neal wants to win this fight, again, he's going to have to get on inside boxing range, make it dirty, eat some shots coming in, and really have some nice work in the clinch. All in all, I think you guys can already tell who I'm leaning towards to this fight. I think, yes, to answer the question of the video, Ian Garry will pass this incredible litmus test of fighting Geoff Neal, and Ian Garry will move into the top 10. I just cannot ignore Geoff Neal's blatant hole at not being a good outside striker and just really struggling against guys who have incredible lateral movement and make it really tricky for them to fight and really tricky for them to hit. I love Vicente Luque, but he's not a guy who's going to be insane with his movement, with his lateral movement on the outside. He's a guy who's notorious for putting on incredibly fun fights, eating a couple shots to give a couple shots, and banging on the inside. And that's a really nice stylistic matchup for Geoff Neal, and that's something that Ian Garry is not going to offer to Geoff Neal. So again, I think Ian Garry is going to somewhat pick him apart from range. I think Geoff Neal is going to have some really nice moments from range as well. I think he'll land that power hand, that straight hand a couple of times on Ian Garry. Overall, though, I think Ian Garry is really going to win this fight from the outside. Thanks for listening, guys. Let me know in the comment section below, do you think Ian Garry can pass the Geoff Neal litmus test in the welterweight division?